Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Hall. I'm a senior consultant here at Education Elements. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about stakeholder engagement, particularly in the plan and align process. So quickly, I'm going to walk you through a tool that we use at Education Elements to determine who we might engage during this point, what tactics we might use to engage with them, and then really centering in on the why for this part of the process too. I'm also, after this, going to pass it over to Kim, who's going to talk to you a little bit more deeply, specifically about equitable stakeholder engagement, common pitfalls that befall us in this part of the process, and some really great tactics and self-reflection strategies you might want to incorporate as you incorporate equity more so at the forefront of your strategic planning process. So we define stakeholder at Education Elements as a person with an interest or a concern in this process. And of course, since that's such a broad definition, that means that we have so many different stakeholders who fall into that group. And that also means that each one of these stakeholders has different needs. And so as we think about particularly equitable stakeholder engagement, it's really important that we are super intentional and are meeting our stakeholders where they are. So at Education Elements, we like to use what we call the stakeholder engagement matrix, this 2x2, which helps us better differentiate who we might be talking to in our community and really making this a human-centered experience. The 4 different categories that we like to look at in this matrix is high influence, low interest, high influence, high interest, low influence, low interest, and low influence, high interest. When we say influence, all we mean is that the level of authority that the stakeholder group might have in decision-making about the plan. And when we say interest, we mean the level of impact that this plan may have on their daily lives or in their professional lives. So when we look, at the top left corner, particularly at our high influence, low interest folks, great ways to engage them are to really think about what are the quick hitting, high leverage points that they need to make sure that they're hearing on a regular basis. What are the big themes that they need to hear? What are the big takeaways that they need to move decisions forward? And keeping communication at that level. And then when we look at our high influence, high interest folks, these are really the people who we want to involve every step of the way. They're deeply impacted, and their support will really make sure that aspects of the plan will move forward. So incorporating people in this group as a thought partner, considering the expertise that they bring to the table, and really involving them in the design of the plan is major. Third, we have our low influence, high interest folks. This is a group that might be saying, I'm not very interested, or rather, I am very interested, and please don't forget about me. This is another group that often in these kind of processes and big undertakings like a strategic plan might be available to really lean in at specific points and give expertise about specific topics or requests. So think about in your district who might fall into this category. And last but certainly not least, we have our low influence, low interest folks. This is a group that is very important. All groups in the quadrant are. And something that this group might be thinking are, I'm not very interested and don't need to be involved, but don't forget about me. Especially for this group, as they might be a group that is often left out of conversations involving the strategic planning process. It's super important to make sure that we are engaging them intentionally and specifically, and how you might utilize other engagement groups to spread word to this particular quadrant about what's happening with the plan. Last thing I'll leave you with before I pass it over to Kim a little bit more is a couple tools. As you go into this document, it'll help you to articulate your why, identify your stakeholders, plot your stakeholders on the matrix that we just went through, and then explore tactics aligned to wherever your stakeholders land. Another thing that I'll mention is we have a Connect guide. Kim will go into that a little bit more deeply. And the role of this guide is to help you think even more deeply about equitable stakeholder engagement. So I wish you the best of luck. I encourage you to use the matrix in your early conversations and continuously throughout your planning process. And I'm here to support in any way you need. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Stewart, and I'm a design principal with Education Elements, and I want to take a moment to talk about equitable engagement. When districts engage stakeholders, often they find that the voices that they hear from most frequently don't necessarily represent the community at large. Historically marginalized populations in particular tend to be underrepresented in stakeholder outreach. This trend is surprisingly common when a district does not intentionally plan for equitable engagement. Now, I want to zero in on my use of the phrase intentionally plan for a moment. You may feel like all community members are invited to share their voice, But I challenge you to consider what you are actively doing to create spaces that begin to remove some of the barriers that may create disconnects in your community. So consider how you might intentionally engage stakeholders in a way that both invites and amplifies underrepresented voices. To learn more about how you might do that and how you might intentionally plan for equitable engagement, check out our Connect and Include guides. Now, I want to leave you with a question to consider. What is one shift that you might make in your approach to stakeholder engagement to ensure that your strategic plan is both intentionally inclusive and responsive to your community's needs? Thanks so much for watching. For more content from Education Elements, be sure to follow us on Twitter and check out our website.
Hello, my name is Alain and I'm a design principal with Education Elements. I'll be walking you through some considerations to take in communicating your plan before it's ready for launch. I'd like to start by sharing a story about my wedding this past June. My partner and I decided to get married on the rooftop of our apartment building after having to cancel our Cancun destination wedding plans due to the pandemic. We had our budget so that we could secure a caterer and photographer, and we also came up with a schedule that would make sure everything flowed beautifully from start to finish. When the day came, my partner walked down the aisle, we exchanged our vows and our rings, and we heard guests share stories about how they met us and what it meant for them to witness two people coming together to build a shared life. But as we heard these beautiful stories, we realized that our caterer must have been downstairs trying to enter the building. Neither of us had our phones on us, but we noticed that the time we scheduled for her to arrive had already passed. We also saw our photographer struggling to find the right spots to take photos due to the way we set up our socially distanced seating chart. In that moment, it hit us that even though we had a solid plan, we never communicated any of the small details with our vendors, her maid of honor, my best man, or anyone else who could have helped. I know this sounds like a nightmare, but everything actually worked out. I share this story to highlight the importance of communicating your strategic plan in order to make sure that you prevent communication lapses from impacting your success. So what are some potential pitfalls that might surface when you fail to communicate effectively? Here's some data that reveals some of those potential effects. According to a study completed by the Project Management Institute, 56% of the portion of project budgets that deal with mitigating risk is attributed to ineffective communication. They also found that high-performing organizations create formal communications plans for nearly twice as many projects as their lower performing counterparts. So having a plan for how you communicate is also a success factor. Lastly, ineffective communication led to project failure 1/3 of the time. So I think the challenge here is clear, but what are some steps you can take to make sure you're communicating your plan effectively? You want to be clear on 4 key factors to an effective communication plan, and they include your key messages and tactics, your messengers, your messaging opportunities, and your bottom line. As I go through the essential questions for each of these factors, you'll see possible responses on the right. For key messages and tactics, your essential question might be, how are we tailoring our plan's overall message to each audience? Are you using social media, email, newsletters, or a website? Where are you storing this information so that it continues to be accessible after you've made contact? For messengers, you're asking who are the best messengers for any given message and/or audience. When thinking about your opportunities to actually share a message, you should ask, when might we share this message and how often should we communicate to provide our community with updates? And lastly, in thinking about the bottom line of your communication, at the end of the day, what do we hope each audience will take away from our effective communication? When you communicate effectively, you activate effective project leadership. This means that you've been able to communicate your desired vision and process effectively in order to guide and motivate team members, stakeholders, and clients. You also satisfy your community members. Effectively communicating all aspects of your plan will also mean that your community will be satisfied with the process and the results. Being transparent will help your community understand if some targets aren't met because they were always in the loop And they may even be able to help you track why some misses occurred. And this can help you ensure success moving forward. Finally, you'll witness engaged team members and a solid project culture. Communicating effectively can also help to establish a better project culture that will serve you in the planning of future initiatives, large or small. Before you launch and monitor your strategic plan, be sure to take into account the following considerations for your planning conversations. Be concise. Keep words at a minimum in your storytelling with the visuals at the forefront to avoid losing people before you have them. Define your terms. Be clear about the terms you're using and why you're using them to avoid confusion. Never lose sight of the future state and the goals you've identified in your plan. As much as possible, always tie your communications back to those goals. Also, remember that you aren't starting with a clean slate. You may already have some, if not all, of the tools at your disposal to communicate effectively. Combine these tools with any new strategies you decide to employ to maximize impact. And lastly, keep in mind how you are not only informing your community, but also inspiring and modeling action. To close out, I'd like to leave you with this question. What impact do you wish effective communication will have on your community and the success of your plan?
I'm Shelby from Education Elements. I'm a former educator who became a policy researcher, who became a consultant. And what that means is so much of the guidance that I give to school leaders and school district leaders is driven by my belief that data play an important role in the decisions we make, and therefore in the educational experiences of our students and their families. In this video, I'm going to talk about how a theory of action can be a great way to identify the right indicators to measure progress in your strategic plan. We'll also talk about how data can be a critical input that you need for executing the strategies that you have included in your plan. First, I want to tell you about my son. He's 8 years old, and like many of the kids across the country, we started second grade this year at home. And my husband and I both work, and so we decided we needed Miles to be more independent and more self-reliant so that we could focus the time we did have to spend with him on helping him with his schoolwork. So we set a goal. We felt like, in particular, he could be more independent in the mornings. Then we made a list of the decisions that he would need to make on his own. He would need to decide when to wake up. He would need to decide what to wear. He would need to decide what kinds of resources and materials he needed for the day. We identified the kind of information he would need that he doesn't always have right now. He doesn't always know what time it is. He doesn't always know what the weather is. And so we knew we needed to get him that information. And the final decision we had to make was the best way to get him that information so that he understood it on his own. He didn't need any interpretation from us, and it would empower him to make those decisions for himself. A theory of action is a logical chain of reasoning that lays out how a set of practices will produce results that have a desired impact. A theory of action can also build confidence that the changes we're seeing are actually attributed to the program that we implemented, creating a causal correlation. They evaluate things like fidelity of implementation. How accurately did we implement what we planned to? What was the effectiveness of that program? Did it produce the results we were intending to see? And what's the impact of those results? Did it have the lasting impact or the long-term impact that we thought it would whenever we decided to implement that program to begin with? Let's apply this framework back to the story about my son. Our theory of action was that if we could give him access to the time of day, the materials that he needed for the day, and access to the weather, that he could get himself ready in the morning, and that might inspire more independence and self-reliance in other parts of his life as well. Some indicators that we could use to evaluate how that theory of action is going, we could look at fidelity. We could evaluate how many mornings he's actually getting access to that information. Can he get the information? Can he understand it without us? We could look at effectiveness. Is that actually leading to him getting ready by himself most mornings? And then we can look at some impact indicators, like, are we actually seeing independence and more self-reliance in other parts of his life as well? In any strategic plan, there's going to be critical pieces of information that you have to make available to the people that you're asking to execute against these strategies. And it's important to ask, as a strategic planning team, what is that information and how do we make it available to them? For example, if one of the strategies in your strategic plan is to provide more personalized learning experiences for your students, what information do teachers need about those students in order to make those personalized instruction decisions to improve those engagement experiences? Now, let's practice writing a theory of action. Think about a program that you want to implement. List the specific changes you'd like to see by implementing that program and what you think those long-term impacts could be as a result of those changes. If you have time, think about some indicators that you could pay attention to decide whether or not the program was actually implemented with fidelity or as you intended, whether or not those changes you wanted to see are happening, and to get a sense of what the long-term impact of those changes are. Thanks so much for watching. As a recap, we talked today about how a theory of action can help you make sure that you identify the right indicators to measure progress in your strategic plan. One thing to keep in mind, this theory of action, it's important to revisit it to make sure that the one you originally wrote still makes sense for your team and for your district. Thanks so much.